Principles of system thinking, system flow, and errors. Now that we have an understanding on the difference between linear and systems thinking, it is time to dive in the analysis system behavior in order to see how they work. We know that systems are composed of elements, a mutual connection between two or more things, and a purpose or function. But there's more to learn if we want to become adept at system thinking. Because we learned about additional parts of system, let's recap some of the key concepts in system thinking that we have covered so far. Keep in mind that systems are always greater than just the sum of their parts. Have a mutual connection between two or more things that often functions through the flow of information. Have a function or purpose, often its least obvious component that is typically the most critical factor in setting a system's behavior. Have a structure that contributes to the system's behavior, which is shown as a group of events over time. Dunella Meadows identify additional parts that makes up a system. It is a stock. A stock serves as the base of every system. Stock may be physical, like an amount of money, inventory, or information. Stocks can also be feeling or attitudes as people hold. Stocks are not static. They change over time, like based on the impacts of the flow. Stocks are sort of snapshots in time showing a current view of the changing flow in the system. The next additional part of a system is a flow. Flow are actions that impact a system. A flow might be a success or a failure, purchases or sales, deposit or withdrawals, or growth or decline. Now that we already know what is a stock and what is a flow, you might ask, how are stock and flows related in systems? This is how they are related. If there are more inflows than outflows, the level of stock will increase. Second, if there are more outflows than inflows, the level of stocks will decrease. If the amount of outflows and inflows is equal, the stock level will remain at its current level and will be unchanged. This is what we call dynamic equilibrium. The level of stocks is increased if the outflow is decreased or its inflow is increased. Stocks provide a sort of security barrier in a system since they serve to delay the initial shock that may affect the system. Stock preserves the ability of inflows and outflows to remain independent. For example, employees in a company are a stock. New hires and recruits are inflows into this stock. Retirees, transfers, and those who resign or are fired are outflows from the stock. Another example is the oranges in a citrus grove or a stock. The inflows are the growth of the citrus trees and the amount of oranges that can successfully survive until they are ripe enough to be harvested. The outflows are the oranges that fall from the trees that are rot before they are to be picked. The oranges may not reach maturity because of the impact of the freezing temperatures. The oranges which are lost due to insects or diseases harming the trees, and the inventory of oranges that are sold to customers as fruits or juice. Understanding how stocks and flows behave over time teaches you a lot about how complex systems behave as well. For example, if you have ever tried to lose weight, you understand the dynamics of stock and flows. Here how it goes. If you consume some number of calories as you burn through exercises and your daily activities, that's outflow, your weight will stay the same. This is what is known as a state of dynamic equilibrium. The stock level will not change even though materials is constantly flowing through it. If you enjoy eating all the delicious food that the holiday season brings, and you eat more calories while you spend more time visiting your family and friends, and you have less time exercising and burning calories than usual, your weight will increase. You will notice a few extra pounds the next time you step on the scale. In that situation, we can say that the number of calories is your inflow, Your weight is your stock, and the daily activities is your outflow. If you find some extra motivation and decide to eat more healthy foods and smaller portions, you will consume less calories. Combining that with a more active lifestyle and exercise routine will cause you to burn more calories. With that situation, or relationship between your inflows and outflows, your weight as your stock will start to decrease, and you will see smaller number of pounds the next time you weigh yourself. We can draw a few conclusions about stocks and flows from our simple example. The level of the stock will always rise if the total inflows is greater than the total outflow. The level of the stock will always decrease if the total outflow is greater than the total inflow. If the total outflow is equal to the total inflow, the stock level will not change. It will stay in the state of dynamic equilibrium. Our mind has a tendency to focus more on stocks and flows. When it does focus on flows, it seems that inflows are most easily concentrated on the outflows. That means that we may sometimes forget that there is more than one way for us to get our stock to the level we desire. The stock level can be increased by either increasing the inflow or by decreasing the outflow. The stock level can be decreased by either increasing the outflow or decreasing the inflow. In our example of our weight, we tend to realize that we can lose weight by exercising more, but sometimes we may forget that we can also lose weight by eating less. Looking to our goals for our environment is another way to find more easy example of the ways we can impact our stock level. One major concern for our environment is how much trash we add to our landfills each year. If we want to decrease the stock, we could either recycle more or reduce the packaging that our goods come in. Understanding a system's momentum can give you an opportunity to steer it towards the positive outcome you are hoping for. Just by the nature of stocks being present in systems, inflows and outflows are allowed to be independent from one another and even out the balance in each other. People continually observe stocks so they can decide the action they need to take in order to adjust the level of stocks and ensure that they are in acceptable ranges. System thinkers are always studying this feedback. And feedback loops are the third additional part of systems, which is defined by Daniela Meadows. When a system displays a behavior that is constantly over time, it is highly likely that there is a mechanism that is working to control and create that behavior. The mechanism works through the feedback loops. Seeing a consistent pattern of behavior over time is a first signal that a feedback loop might exist. A feedback loop is created when changes in the level of a stock affect the inflows or outflows of the stock. Think about your bank account as an example. The amount of money in your account is a stock. The amount of money in your bank can also determine if you are charged a fee by your bank for allowing your money to dip below a certain amount. That is your outflow. How much money flows into or out of your account is not set amount. Instead, it will change based on how much money you have in your account in any given month. Feedback loops either keep a stock's level within a certain range or allow it to increase or decrease. No matter what the feedback loops does, the inflows and outflows to and from the stock are determined by the level of the stock itself. When a stock level is observed, a correction action is taken when needed. In an example of our bank account, it may be as simple as the bank sending you an alert that your account has dipped below the level you are required to maintain in order to avoid being charged a fee. Once you receive the alert, you may decide to take the corrective action of depositing more money into that account. There are two feedback loops responsible for producing dynamic behavior. A reinforcing loop the positive one, and the balancing loop, which is the negative one. Understanding how these two loops work is a cornerstone of system thinking. A feedback loop happens when the change in the stock leads to a further change in the stock. If a further change in stock continues in the same direction, it is called reinforcing. If the further change in the stock level moves in the opposite direction, it is called balancing or negative loop. These feedback loops shift dominance over time. Dominance is the key concept of system thinking. During the period that one loop dominates another, the dominant loop has a more powerful impact on the system's behavior. As you analyze the data coming to you in the form of predictions and forecasts, you want to determine if the model that is being created is the accurate representation of reality. You may ask yourself these three questions. Are the driving factor likely to act as predicted? This is just going to be a guess about what might happen in the future. There is no way to know for sure what will happen. In order to increase the likelihood of correcting predictions, a system analysis is often run to test what might happen if the driving factors act in the variety of ways. This is not supposed to generate a forecast of what is expected to happen, but rather to provide various scenarios worthy of consideration in the decision-making process. The second question is, if the driving factors act as predicted, would the system react as expected? This question is about whether the model is an accurate one that is able to express the dynamics of the system correctly. It asks you to put aside any doubts that you may have about the original prediction and move forward with the what-if analysis of the system. You are now assessing whether the basic behavior patterns is realistic. The last question is, what is the guiding force behind the driving factors? This question involves examining what is controlling the inflows and outflows. It is distinguishing whether the driving factors are truly dependent or if they are also ingrained in the system. It is trying to determine if there are other factors at work beyond the driving factors. In analyzing system behavior, it is important to remember that one balancing feedback loop often works hand in hand with another and also with another enforcing loop. Any changes that happen within the system will incur delays. Let's think of this in terms of a retail clothing store system. The buyer for the retail store must constantly monitor the stock of the system and the inflows and outflows at work in order to make decisions about inventory. As the buyer analyzes the behavior of a system, no matter how they may try to overcome them, there will inherently be delays in the process. There are three delays which are very common in business systems when it comes to inventory analysis. First, there is a perception delay. This may be an intentional or intentional delay. In the case of analyzing inventory, it is often intentional. When the buyer of the retail store is trying to decide whether or not to order additional stock, they do not want to immediately react to the very small blip of the increase or decrease of sales. Before making ordering decision, they will want to average the sale for at least a small amount of time to differentiate actual sales trends from just a temporary uptick or downturn. Next is there is a response delay. Once it becomes clear that more clothing needs to be ordered, the buyer doesn't want to make a complete adjustment in one single order. They make partial adjustment over the small period of time to be sure that the trends they are observing are real. Finally, there is a delivery delay. This is one that is largely out of the buyer's control but must be accounted for ordering decisions. When the buyer places an order, it will take some time for their supplier to receive, process, and deliver the order to the store. As the order arrives, the buyer will have to continue to monitor the stock and inflows and outflows carefully in order to be sure that the decisions they made were correct. Oftentimes, some mistakes will have been made because it is never possible to predict what customers will do with complete certainty. No matter how experienced the system thinker buyer is, adjustments will continually have to be made, not because the buyer was careless or arrogant, but because there will always be a slight delay in the information received coupled with physical delivery delays, which will prevent their action from having an immediate impact on inventory. The system thinking buyer will have to continue to analyze and adjust the length of the delays in the decision making process, because the length of those delays can play a major role in changing the way a system behaves. It is crucial to remember that no one store system operates in isolation. In case of our clothing store example, the order for additional clothing or reduction in orders also impact productions and manufacturing for their suppliers. Many systems are interconnected and independent to one another, and each one of them will add their own delays and decisions to the mix. It is in this interconnectedness that causes business cycles to form and impacts the economy. Systems thinking and behavior analysis play such an integral part. As I stated before, I would never tell you that system thinking was going to be easy, but I would say it was going to be worth it. There is a quote that states, "Anything worth doing is worth doing well." I am certain that your life experience tells you it is often the most challenging things that brings you the greatest rewards. System thinking is no different. It is inherently challenging, which means there are bound to be errors that come with the territory. If you can overcome the errors and difficulties, you will find your way to becoming a strong system thinker. Balancing feedback loops are the stabilizing force in systems. When they are at work, you should notice very few changes. And even though outside forces are impacting the system, the typical behavior pattern should still be in place. While there are many examples of when maintaining the status quo is a good thing, unfortunately, there are also times when this is not the case. Sometimes the behavioral pattern of the system can get stuck in a real rut. This is called policy resistance. Policy resistance happens when, despite efforts to come up with innovative solutions or policy fixes, the system's behavior pattern remains unchanged. Policy resistance arises when the goals of the subsystem do not match. If the goals are inconsistent, they often end up competing with one another, and the system ends up being pulled in multiple directions as each actors or subsystems tries to get their own needs met instead of uniting behind the common system goal. When a system is policy resistant, everyone pulls in different directions and works hard to keep the system from moving too far away from their individual goals. What ends up happening is all of that effort keeps a system in place that no one really wants to be. It is motionless and often stuck with the status quo. Let's talk about policy resistance as a reaction. At times, policy resistance can result in unimaginable tragedy. In 1967, the communist dictator by the name of Nicolae Ceausescu led the Romanian government as they decided that Romania needs to increase its population. While that conclusion does not seem to be concerning on its own, the approach they took to help them achieve their goal of growing the country's population is both terrifying and heartbreaking. The Romanian government made it illegal for women under the age of 45 to have an abortion. The birth rate tripled, but the people of Romania enacted their own form of policy resistance. Even though the government maintained their policy of making contraceptives and abortions illegal, the people of Romania began lowering the birth rate back to the former level. Women, in trying to regain control of their lives, resorted to getting dangerous, illegal abortions, which resulted in tripling the maternal mortality rate. If women did get birth to children they did not plan to have, or could not financially provide for, they often abandoned the children to orphanages. Romanian families knew they could not adequately take care of the children their government expected them to raise. As a result, they decided to resist the policy at great decrement to themselves and the generation of children who spent their youth in the orphanages. The policy enforced by the Romanian government and subsequent resistance enacted by its people resulted to heartbreaking, unimaginable tragedy. Thankfully, once this government was removed from power, the first law passed by the new government repealed the ban of abortion and contraceptives, which have proven to be so harmful for Romania. The new law holds true to this day, as it is possible to purchase contraceptives in Romania without a prescription. As for calming down as a reaction, as we have already seen, one way to combat policy resistance is to attempt to overpower it. That was the approach that the Romanian dictators took. Another approach when faced with policy resistance is to give up on the policies that are ineffective and redirect the energy and resources towards new policies. Of course, you may not be getting everything that you want in the scenario, but this is like a tug of war. If you calm down a bit and let go of some of the tensions, those pulling against you will calm down too. If this can truly be achieved in a system, then you can pause to study the feedback of the system and possibly find a win-win solution for all the actors and subgroups as you steer the system in a more positive direction. It is easy to see how the calming down approach is very different than trying to overcome the policy resistance. The most powerful way to overcome policy resistance is to find a way to unite the goals of all of the subsystems. A unifying goal that everyone can work towards is a powerful one. We have witnessed this many times throughout history as people from around the world put any differences they have aside and came together to volunteer, donate, grieve, and help one another for a natural disaster or tragic terrorist attack. As a conclusion, as a human being and a student of history, we can think of too many times when enacting a certain policy to achieve an individual goal lead to disastrous result. Whether it is a lasting, devastating effects to detonating a nuclear weapon or using chemical weapons in a war which continue to impact subsequent generation with birth defects and disabilities, or even sometimes on a smaller scale with an outcome that is no less painful, please take a moment to reflect upon how focusing a short-sighted, selfish goals can lead to an unimaginable tragedy and many unintended consequences. When individual actors and subsystems lose sight of the guiding goals of the system, or when the system lacks of clear and unifying overarching goals, there will be a power struggle and competition of sorts as everyone tries to pull the stock of the system closer to their own narrow goals. Policy resistance can result as everyone devotes a lot of time and energy to trying to pull the system in multiple directions at once. The outcome is often the system being stuck in place that no one really likes. This is a naive statement, but I will do it anyway. If everyone could let go of their own individual goals in order to redirect their efforts and energy towards the larger and more important goals of the systems as a whole, great things can be achieved. There is nothing more powerful than being able to unite and support a goal that everyone can believe in and work towards together.